I have a lead for you.
And I'm the class chair for the class of 2008 reunion committee. It's great to see so many of you here today. It's my pleasure to introduce this session, Global Business Trends, the Future of Global Trade and Investments. I'm delighted to introduce Amit Khandelwal, Jerome A. Chazen Professor of Global Business and Director of the Jerome A. Chazen Institute for Global Business. You can read more about the panelists today on the information sheet that was distributed to you when you walked in. I was honored to be asked to introduce this session. Columbia Business School has meant a lot to me personally and professionally, and I was asked to just talk for a minute about my story. I left my law practice shortly after my son was diagnosed with autism, became a stay-at-home father to run his home program. And then at age 50, I came back to Columbia Business School full-time at the MBA program, where I learned all kinds of great skills, including Professor Duggan's class in his classroom. And my wife and I then opened up Word's Bookstore in Maplewood, New Jersey, where we do vocational training for young people with autism. I also made tons of great personal connections here, including my good friend Brian Petersen, who will explain why I'm wearing this kind of unusual looking tie. With no further ado, I turn it over to Amit. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Can you all hear me? Okay. Since you are back in yours hall, I figured I should do a PowerPoint. Right, so let me tell you a little bit about how we organize this session. So obviously, thinking about international trade, it's never been I'm an international trade economist here at Columbia. I'm somewhat unusual in a business school in the sense that I don't work on what you might think of as a core function in business. I don't do marketing, I don't do accounting or finance. I study international trade, in particular how emerging markets adjust to rapid changes in trade agreements. And obviously, international trade has been in the news today, and I thought it would be a great opportunity now to hear a perspective from our alums, to hear about how they're thinking about potential changes in the global economic environment. And so I'll introduce my panelists in a moment, but just to sort of set up the stage, let me talk a little bit about kind of why I think this is an interesting time to talk about this. So. I will say that one of the things that I do here at Columbia Business School is I'm the director of the Chazen Institute, and at the Chazen Institute, one of the main missions that we have is to organize global immersion experiences in which students spend 6 weeks here in Columbia learning about a particular market, and then we spend 1 week in that market meeting with companies, private sector companies, policymakers, NGOs, to kind of get a better understanding of the forces that are changing those environments. And so the one that I do at the moment is for Myanmar. I'm happy to see my former TA who is in the audience here. And Myanmar, if you think about the conversations that they might be having in a very low-income country that's just kind of opened up to international trade, those conversations about what international trade can mean for that country are very different from what's going on here. All right, so that's kind of as a backdrop. Now, what's been going on in the United States, and most of you are going to be familiar with, at least if you follow U.S. politics, kind of familiar with these trends qualitatively, but let me just give you some numbers behind this. So if you think about U.S. manufacturing employment in terms of total number of employees in the manufacturing sector here in the United States peaked by the late 1970s. And then since that period, there's been a steady decline. And you can kind of roll in the back of your head kind of big changes in the economic environment as well as in technological changes that are going on. But between 80 and 2000, the year 2000, employment fell 2.5 million. And then during that recession in 2000, employment in the manufacturing sector here in the United States fell by 2.7 million. And then it continues to kind of fall off the cliff, right? And so now that gives you a sense, that you see that magnitude, it gives you a very big sense of what's driving a lot of the angst in particular locations. And of course, this is kind of felt more in particular regions in the United States, as relative to New York, for example. Trade economists who studied this know, however, that although this causes a lot of pain, to particularly the people who are in the sector, if you look at overall levels of unemployment in the U.S., those are not actually driven by changes in trade policy. Those, we think, have largely to do with changes in what the central bank does. And so if you look at these, this is just the overall unemployment rate, again, going back to the 1950s. It's kind of moving around, and it moves around with what the central bank is doing and how the central bank is responding to. It doesn't really map one-to-one. And so what this is saying is that there's massive disruption in the manufacturing sector, and then people are trying to figure out how to reallocate towards different sectors. And if you think about where the reallocation has been occurring, we have moved, at least the people who study this, have moved away from thinking about the adjustment process in terms of education. So we used to think about this as degrees versus not degrees. Okay, but it turns out that that's a pretty crude way to think about where the challenges and adjustment costs are. And so we've started to think about classifying what people do in terms of their skill sets or in terms of their tasks. And you can classify people in terms of jobs that are kind of routine, right? So you can think about assembly line jobs that could be codified by software, or could be codified by someone sitting in Shanghai. Non-routine jobs, those would be jobs like non-routine cognitive jobs like management consulting, designing software and so forth, and non-routine manual jobs. And so these would be things like janitorial services or physical therapy and home health care. And if you think about those, there's some correlation with education, but it's imperfect. In particular, that last line. Like, you can have very low educated people who are sitting in non-routine manual jobs, but you can also have fairly educated people, like people who go to school for physical therapy. And if you look at trends in employment by those three types of tasks, you can see that people in non-routine cognitive jobs, this is the kind of the management level positions, have just been growing. Those skill sets are being demanded in the workforce. Non-routine manual jobs are also growing, and it's really the people who are working in routine jobs. And those routine jobs, again, can be substituted for maybe workers overseas, but also technology. And economists, again, who have studied this, have found that if you try to do some decompositions, technology seems to be the bigger trend. But of course, international trade is very visible, right? And that's where gives you a sense of why we see a lot of growing backlash to trade agreements over here in the United States. And so that's just kind of a setup for why we think about, it's very hard to interpret what's going on, at least in this administration, along many dimensions. Even in the past week, a trade agreement that Trump kind of threw out the window in the first week that he came into office is suddenly apparently now back on the table. We don't know exactly what that means, but the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement may be coming back. We don't know. But what I don't want to lose sight of is something that's, I think, really important for understanding the global economic environment. Right? So I'm just going to end my short little talk here with one more picture, which I think is really interesting. So we're used to thinking about inequality within a country, but now let's think about lining up everyone in the world in terms of how much income they have. So take everyone in the world and try to convert them into a standard currency and think about their earnings. So you would have like the people in the United States, people in this room are going to be sitting, and if you think about the 7 billion people we have in the world, we're in the upper percentiles of this distribution, and then the landless laborers in Botswana, for example, would be at the very end, right? And now what I want you to try to think about, what is this graph going to look like if we see a growth in income across the income distribution over, say, since 1980. Okay, so how much have the world's poorest grown in terms of their percentages of their income relative to the global middle class, relative to the upper class of the global income distribution? All right, so of course, I know, think about this doing it in percentages. All right, so just think for a moment, what do you think that graph would look like? And let me flip it up here, right? And this is actually what I think is a phenomenal graph. It's sometimes referred to as the elephant graph because of the way it's right? This curve, this is the part of the curve that gets a lot of discussion here in the United States. Okay, so this axis is 0. So this is basically saying that people in the middle class of the United States, which are rich relative to the world, right, have experienced very little real wage gains over the past 30 years. Okay, those are numbers that have been documented. And of course, the global elites are doing very well. Okay, so this is like the richest people in the world sit here. I'm sorry?
This room.
It's this room.
People in this room.
People in this room are going to be sitting in certainly the 95th percentile of the global income distribution, right? And then people at the very end have also not experienced large increases in their income gains. But this is the one that I think really matters for the global economic environment, which is largely driven by China and India, just because that's where 2 billion people live. And so they've seen, in percentage terms, the largest increases in their wages, in percentage terms, right? And so this is again telling you how different parts of the world are thinking about what the potential is for global trade. Okay, so this is just kind of a frame to sort of think about the conversation that we'll have. And now let me introduce our panelists. So I'll start with Shirley. So Shirley Wang is an undergrad from UCLA and finished from Columbia Business School in 1993. And after Columbia Business School, she went on to found a great company called Plasco, which she'll tell us more about. This is a leading millwork products importer, manufacturer, and distributor. And she's also been heavily involved in philanthropic activities along with her husband, Walter. They're the founders of the Walter and Shirley Wang Foundation. They have a very active philanthropic mission here in the United States as well as in China. And in particular, Shirley, as I understand, has been very involved in education in particular. Right? And so one of the questions that I'm going to be turning to the panel is trying to think about, in this world of kind of what we're thinking about over the next 20 years, is what is the role of education and trying to prepare both the young, in particular, maybe graduates from Columbia Business School for that. Next we have Sajjad Ebrahim. So Sajjad Ebrahim comes from Karachi, Pakistan, and graduated from Columbia in 1973. And after graduating, he went to Toronto, where he built an incredible company called Parpak, which is one of the leading manufacturers of plastics. And recently retired, and to be more kind of focused 100% on philanthropic ventures, as far as I understand. And I guess we're going to be curious to hear Sajjad's perspective, both as coming from Pakistan and coming here, as well as kind of building this global company. Robert Yu, undergrad from Trinity College. You graduated from Columbia in 2003. So Robert's a senior VP of operations at UA Pharma, which is an Asian healthcare company that's based in Korea, and previously worked at Novartis. He's the leader of the alumni club in Korea, and also a member of the CBS Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Advisory Board. And then finally, we have Ryan Petersen, who's our most recent grad, who has an undergrad degree from Berkeley and an MBA from Columbia in 2008. So after Columbia, Ryan went on to find a company called Import Genius. And Import Genius was kind of a supplier intelligence data provider, in which I guess your claim to fame was that you were able to spot the iPhone 3G being shipped prior to Apple actually making the announcement, if I remember correctly. And subsequently has gone on to found a new company called Flexport, which I guess Ryan will talk more about it, but I guess he's referred to it as kind of building the software for global trade. It's an incredibly fragmented market, and this company's doing remarkably well. And Ryan has been part of the Y Combinator and has been getting major interest from investors in multiple rounds of funding. And so if you think about how we organize this panel, we've got kind of 3 slices of manufacturing, and then we've got Ryan who forwards their goods on the right. So I think Ryan's kind of the link between all of these. Okay, so with that, let me I'm going to take a seat. I can turn this off actually. And I guess what I'll do is maybe Shirley, you can start off by talking a little bit more about your company and how you got there, and in particular, kind of the role of global markets, both maybe on the product side and on the labor side that might be particularly salient for you.
Okay, so thank you for coming to listen to all of us. But I'll let you know, I'm Shirley Wang, and I founded Plaspro 1 year after I graduated from Columbia Business School. and it's a fiberglass door manufacturer, a PF frame, which is building products. And you probably are all wondering, what is fiberglass doors, right? So I'm going to give you my 1-minute spiel, okay? So fiberglass doors are residential exterior doors, and when you think of doors, you think of wood doors, right? But they only represent 25% of the U.S. market. And that's the reason why is because it's expensive, it mildews, it warps. Then you come to 60% of the U.S. market is steel doors. And the reason why is because it's cheap. But the thing is that it dents and dings and it rusts. And by the time contractor finishes the house, he has to replace the door because it's dent and ding. So there you come to fiberglass doors, okay? Which has the beauty of wood, but the strength of steel. So all of you want to buy fiberglass doors now, right? So anyways, I started this company, you know, like almost 23 years, 24 years ago. And to prepare for this panel, you know, because all of you guys are all Columbia Business School graduates and really smart, so I Googled what are the global trends. So according to McKinsey, for all of you consultants out there, one of them is urbanization. I mean, I think 50% of the GDP growth from 2010 to 2025 will come from 440 cities in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, in these emerging markets. But I would say probably they said that 95% of the Western world probably wouldn't even know where to pinpoint those cities. So then the other trend that is the breakdown of the breakneck pace of technology, of adoption and development. It's truly the golden age of gadgetry and AI and robotics and things like that. And if you really think about it, I think radio, to get 50 million users, it took 38 years. But WeChat, in 4 years, reached 300 million users. I mean, you can just imagine that pace, right? And then, but also with this instant communication, there's like a lot of global connections. And obviously, you know, with the US, it's definitely one of the dominant players. But then I don't think that's the ultimate, you know, person on the table. I mean, if you look at it in Africa and China, in 2000, it was, in 2000, I think the trade between China and Africa was $9 billion. But I think 2012, it was $211 billion. And then with, you know, OBOR, One Belt, One Road, I mean, I think that's going to be a game changer. So anyways, back to my company, okay. How did my company, you know, how do we invest and adapt to all these trends and things like that? First of all, I think our company, we source globally. I mean, whether it's machinery, our raw materials. And sometimes, you know, I have to say my engineers, our people, are hesitant when they say they have to source it from China, even though it's cheaper or somewhere else. And I tell them, they don't want to do it because of language barrier, it's difficulty to work, it's distance and time. But I tell them, if we don't learn how to do it, somebody's going to learn how to do it, and somebody's going to surpass us. So I force them that we have to look everywhere. So that's global competition. And then the other thing is, in 2010, I used to outsource in a way, I had imported our doors from Taiwan. But then in 2010, when the trend was outsourcing to all the other countries because of cheaper labor, I did the opposite. I invested in Ashtabula, Ohio, which is, I built a plant there. But how do we compete? How do we compete, you know, with the labor, salaries are so much higher here. So what we did is that we did automation. We built a 200,000 square foot, plant. It's fully automated. So we make about a million doors with about 100 people. And so that's one thing that we did. And then the other thing that I think that we learned from China is, how they've gotten to foreign markets. And like going back to the Africa story, when I was in China, I saw there's so many Africans there. How come there's so many of them here? And they were purchasing goods for their country. And then when I went to Africa, I saw, wow, there's a lot of Chinese businesses. And I was wondering, why was that? And I was asking around, and then I finally realized it's because, the Africans appreciated the Chinese products because, even though they didn't have the bells and whistles from the Western world, from Europe, from America, but China produced products that were good enough, that worked, and was prices that they could afford. And so that's a lesson that, is about customization. And same thing with when I started with Plastpro, when we did it, is that how we got into market is that we kind of customized it. We developed doors that, customized our hinge preps and our door sizes so that, and our competition in the U.S. wouldn't do it. So that's what we offer to the U.S. market, and also we had innovation. You know, our doors, to sell my doors again, is that we had HydroShield technology, which is that we have 6 sides, you know, waterproof and maintenance-free. So, you know, everybody loves our doors, of course. But then I started to think, you know, what about China coming into, other people coming into the U.S. market and coming to compete with me? What would I do then? And I still am, you know, wary of it. But you know what? Throughout the years, what we've done is we've built a barrier to entry in many ways, because we've developed so many SKUs and door designs. For anybody domestically or internationally to catch up with us, it'll be difficult because it's such a large investment. So that's one of the things that we do. And then the other thing is that we expand in the future. You know, we also plan to expand to China, and then also with technology for e-commerce. I'm sure in the future you guys do not want to go to Home Depot or go to a store to buy your door. You want to buy it online. So I think that we have to bridge a gap between manufacturing to measuring to pre-hanging to delivery to the home. So anyways, my bottom line is that, you know, no matter if your company is selling domestically or internationally, you always have to be aware of all these trends.
Thanks. Great. Sajjad, hi. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Sajjad Ebrahim. I graduated in '73 from Columbia. Went back to Pakistan, then moved to Canada in '77, bought a small plastics company. And 36 years later, I was an overnight success. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I run my own family office. I'm involved in philanthropic activities, but we also investing the funds that we received on the sale of the business. So investing that fund as well. There's an organization called Club B, and they hold conferences for family offices all over the world. And the fellow who runs it is from Toronto, and he basically said to me that most entrepreneurs, when they sell their business, they don't realize that the next day they're getting into another business, which is the business of investing, which is far more difficult than the business they just sold. Yeah? So that's the story of my life now. But I'll talk a little bit about the company that I ran for about 36 years. It was a small plastic manufacturing company that made food containers for plastics, and I'm sure all of you all have seen it or used it for things like salads, baked goods, and muffins, cakes, pies, cut fruit, and all that kind of good stuff. Huh? So initially we were making a lot of cookie trays and mushroom containers, etc., and then the trend changed in terms of the supermarkets going into manufacturing, packaging their goods into the clear plastic containers. Huh? And that's when we saw the growth in our company grow tremendously. Huh? We had a lot of competition from local companies and from the US companies. And after a while, we sort of had an off-site meeting, and we said, how are we going to distinguish ourselves? Huh? And one of the things was that there was a book out there, which is a very small book called Focus, Your Future Depends Upon It. Huh? So we said, what are we going to be doing that is going to be different than what our competitors are doing? And we decided that we were going to be the best thermoformer, custom thermoformer in North America. Huh? So we decided that all our equipment, all our manufacturing processes, all our processes inside the company was going to be such that we could do custom work better than anybody else. And if you really look at it, if you look at baked goods, they haven't really changed over the years. It's the packaging that has changed and the presentation that has changed. And that's what makes a big difference. Huh? So again, there was a lot of competition. We were concerned about competition from China and other places. And we said, what are we going to do to make sure that we don't face that kind of a competition? So we got into the sort of logistics business, right? We created, again, a lot of SKUs for the company and did the custom work, and we would ship within 24 hours to our customers. We ended up it was a much more difficult business to run, but because we were geared for it, we could handle it, and we would ship within 24 hours. So people bringing in stuff from China, etc., it was just not possible because the supermarket did not know what they were going to sell the next week. And so it was very, very difficult for other companies to compete with that. So Canada depends upon global trade a lot more than I think most other countries in the world. And a lot of Canadian exports, I think Canada is about the 37-38% of their GDP is dependent upon exports. And the US market is extremely important market for Canadian companies because the market in Canada is very small. We've only got 33 million people. And so unless you have access to the US market, you're really not going to be able to manufacture in that country. We ended up started exporting into the US. We also discovered that a lot of our customers wanted local presence. So we ended up putting up a plant in Houston, a distribution center in California, and we put up a plant in the UK as well. We were a supplier to McDonald's in North America for their salad packaging, and we ended up supplying them salad packaging in Europe. McDonald's had a conference in January of 1994 in Birmingham for all their packaging suppliers, the European conference for all their packaging suppliers, and we were the only company from North America that was supplying the plastic containers. So within 6 months we put up a plant in the UK and continued to supply them locally rather than shipping it from. So that gave the international trade gave us the opportunity to grow the business dramatically. And without that opportunity, the company would have just continued to be a very small local company. I guess there is a lot of noise these days in terms of trade, etc., etc. But I think if you really look at it, trade has benefited everybody. I mean, the amount of people that have come out of poverty because of trade, and the manufacturing process. I mean, we've automated a lot of things, but I think if you create a big enough moat around your company, you can continue to manufacture in North America as well. I guess that's about it.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Yu. I'm class of 2003. I'm from Korea. I'm also, as mentioned, I'm the Columbia Business School Alumni Club leader for Korea. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's my first reunion. I haven't done my 5th and 10th, and this is pretty exciting to see all my classmates here. UU Pharma is a family business. I'm 3rd generation. My grandfather founded in 1941. We are a healthcare company, meaning that we manufacture generic products, we import medical devices, and we manufacture health supplements for Korea and for Southeast Asia. I always call it as a 7-year-old startup because with the global trends, well, not just global trends, but just trends overall, we need to reinvent ourselves over and over again. And like the United States, the prices for generic products are falling, and we need to all go into innovative drug discovery, which the Korean companies nor the Korean government has never done. I mean, I have to say that the Korean health insurance system is a one-payer system, which means that there's no private insurance. The government is the only the insurer. So the government basically sets the pricing, and generic prices are falling, so we need to go out and do drug discovery. Anyways, I'd like to discuss more and share with you my experience of going through a turnaround management, building a company that's local to a more global company in terms of working with the global workforce. And I think there was a talk about automation. We call it smart factories. And I'm happy to share with you my experience with a smart factory that we built in Korea. Thank you.
Cool. Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Petersen. I'm the founder of Flexport. Flexport is a freight forwarder, help companies ship cargo all over the world. Our mission is to make global trade easier for everybody. That's explicitly our mission statement. We think trade is tremendously important. We talked a little bit, you've seen the graph, what it's done. Opening these economies to trade has lifted billions of people out of poverty. So it's nice because you want to start a company these days, you need to have a mission that people can connect to and feel like They're doing something more than just trying to make money. They're actually contributing to good in the world, and we don't have to fake it. I think that the move towards protectionism that we see in this country and in others is extremely misguided. For one, because trade is by definition mutually beneficial, or you wouldn't engage in it. You would not do the trade. And so every time that goods are imported, when we apply these tariffs that Donald Trump is putting forward, those are not tariffs on Chinese exports. Exporters don't pay tariffs. Importers pay tariffs. It's a tariff on the U.S. company that's importing those goods. The second reason that it's so misguided, protectionism, is that you must expose your business to competition or you will become weak and you will lose. Like, you must allow competition. My favorite company in the world is Amazon, because of their ruthlessness by which they expose themselves to competition. Meaning the Amazon marketplace, where they allow third-party sellers to come in and sell on their platform. What did that do? It forced their own teams to be good, because otherwise you wouldn't sell anything you'd buy from the third party. The most recent example that's very interesting for Amazon doing this is taking their customer service software that they use in their call center. They now sell it as a subscription software that you can buy.
Really?
Yep. And what does that do? That tells Amazon, before they didn't know, do we have good customer service software or not? You benchmark, you go look at the competition, you try to understand. Now they know, because if nobody buys the software, it must not be very good. and then they can decide, do we invest more, or do we go buy the competitor's customer service software for ourselves? But that's an example of exposing yourself intentionally to competition. And I think that economies that protect their country, their companies, actually make their companies much weaker. And in the long term, if you're not exposing yourself to that competition, you will lose. I think that what we're seeing in the world is a complete change brought about by the internet, by technology more broadly. The way I would look at this is, if you, in the old world, and sort of back in the 50s and 60s, when there was only 3 television channels, and you had only a few companies big enough to afford it to run ads on those channels, and it was a huge tailwind for big companies like P&G and the big consumer packaged goods companies. Whoever could afford to run ads got much bigger than those who couldn't. There's now an infinite number of channels in the world. Literally, like Instagram, an infinite number, YouTube, infinite number. It's very easy to promote yourself. In fact, self-promotion is dead because it's too easy to do and it's not credible. What that's led to is now the customer's in charge. The customer gets what they want when they want it. It used to be supply chain, and we're going to move towards demand chains. It used to be that you would run some ads and then mass produce 40-foot containers of, there's only 3 kinds of products that anybody could buy, and you would buy whichever one was on TV. And now the customer's got a million options, millions and millions, that they can get what they want. Both of you mentioned customization and like SKU proliferation. That the customer can now buy anything they want, and they want it right now. Like, they want it to get there in 1 hour delivery, and the internet has put the customer in charge. And our companies are not built for that. We were built for an old world where you could mass produce 40-foot containers and sort of force them into distribution channels onto people. And what needs to happen, like the world's logistics system, what we see is that actually the most interesting thing that I learned last year was that when you flip on a light switch or flip off a light switch, in real time you're controlling a power plant. Like, at the speed of light, that power plant is getting a signal to get a little bit hotter and generate a little bit more electricity for you. That's what our supply chain logistics systems are going to have to look like, is that when a customer places an order, at the speed of light, it's sending a signal to the network. Okay, I'm going to fulfill this. Find which product should I get it? Is it sitting on a store shelf? Is it on a truck? Is it not yet produced and I need to queue up production? And the network has to respond in real time to that demand that's put on it. That is not what our logistics and international trade infrastructure looks like today. It looks like you flip the light switch and a bunch of dudes start making phone calls and duct taping wires and faxing things, and then 4 hours later the power comes on. And how much poorer would we be, right? How much less electricity would you use if that's how the electrical grid worked? And yet that's how our global economic infrastructure is actually built. So it's a very interesting time to be working in this space. I think I hope that we see some some sanity prevail in terms of like recognizing the value that mutually beneficial exchange creates for both parties. I don't know why the government feels the need to get involved in, if I have an exchange with you, why should the government care? They get tax money already when we make money. So that's my sort of spiel on, I feel very passionately, as you can tell, about this. I think it's really important for the world that we not screw it up. We lifted 2 billion people out of poverty. Why would we stop? So, thank you.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to pick up on the point that Sajjad and Shirley and Ryan, you guys brought up. So one thing that's very interesting that kind of comes out in what you're saying is that tariffs are potentially the inappropriate instrument to use to remedy some of the problems that I mentioned in those earlier graphs, in part because it sounds like the challenges that you guys kind of overcame was kind of this issue of proximity. So when you have this global market, you try to be closer to your customer in order to customize, learn their preferences, and that's where someone like Ryan's business can kind of come in, trying to improve that speed. And one thing that's really, really fascinating is if you look at trade flows between countries, so take every country in the world, there's approximately 200 countries in the world, and look at their bilateral trade. So the U.S.'s trade with Canada, U.S.'s trade with Mexico, U.S.'s trade with China, Korea's trade with Uganda, and so forth. And you look at that relationship with respect to how far those countries are, and if you look at that relationship in 1950, there's a negative relationship between how far countries are and how much they trade, which is very kind of intuitive, right? And then you think that was 1950, so now overlay 50 years or 60 years of massive innovations in shipping technology, containerization, big changes in tariff rates and so forth. And if you draw that picture today, that relationship is unchanged. There's a lot more trade in the world, but we meaning the United States or any country, still trades disproportionately more with our close partners relative to our far partners. Like that slope of that line hasn't changed. And so it's telling you something very much about like how that kind of macro picture is coming up in what you guys are saying, which is customization is super important. And being local in some sense is the antidote to try to blunt some of this global market. So Shirley, you mentioned that one of the things that's on your horizon is e-commerce. And so maybe to try to connect with trying to understand how your company's business. Can you walk us through like what you're kind of thinking about in terms of e-commerce and how, part of it will be the shipping of getting the good quickly from your factory gate to the customer, and then Ryan, maybe you can step in and sort of talk about all the inefficiencies that are in that process.
Yeah, sure. Well, back to tariffs and what I think is how do you solve balance of trade and things like that. When I first started, I'll be honest with you. When I first started, people said don't buy my product because they should buy made in America. Guess what? I was born in New York, but that's the whole sentiment. And to this day, I'll be honest with you, even my marketing team, because we do produce our products in Ohio, and they said we should stamp made in America. But because people said that about me, I actually don't want to do that, because you know what? I think we should embrace competition, just like Amazon. Whoever makes best widgets, that's where you should buy it from. It shouldn't be where it's made, but who made it the best and who got it there fastest. And so that's the other thing, is that the reason why I'm thinking of e-commerce, and my biggest complaint from our customers is how fast we can get it to them. Because everybody is into, I want it now. I mean, maybe the video game industry is like reward system right now. So that's where we have to think about how do we get there faster and better. It's the inventory, because there's a certain amount of time that for you to bake a good or bake a door, So and then the inventory or extra inventory or whatever. But even the process of measuring like a door and pre-hanging and delivering, those are all logistics that has to be worked out.
Yeah. So Ryan, can you walk us through factory gate to the customer? What are the inefficiencies there, and how's your company?
I think that one of the ways to help people understand the world's economic infrastructure, how does freight move around the world, is actually, we're all very familiar with the parcel players, the FedEx, DHL, UPS, because we use them as consumers. what those companies, and the user experience is pretty good on that. Like you get little tracking milestones. You see it's in Kentucky, and you know it arrives, and you get good tracking. In the freight world, and the difference between freight and parcel is just purely one of size. When you can think when the parcel gets too big and the driver can't lift it up, now it has to go through a different network. And so that's around 100 kilograms where it switches over and becomes a freight. The reason that the parcel integrators are able to provide that nice user experience is because it's all vertically integrated. It's their trucks, their warehouse, their plane, and then mirror image on the other side. So it's door to door, it's all one company, therefore one software system. You get guys with scanners at every stage, and you can get the milestones. In the freight world, there's no company that is big enough to be able to do a door to door move. In fact, you could argue no company could possibly be that big, because you would need to have tens of thousands of trucks in every country, a ship leaving every port, going to every other port every day, an airplane doing the exact same thing. And we're talking about the world's largest company by several orders of magnitude if you could vertically integrate. So therefore, what you have is a complex coordination problem of like, how do I get this piece of freight from a factory in China to a warehouse? We look at it, we see as many as 14 companies will touch that freight from the origin to the destination. And it looks like a paper relay race where it's like, okay, your turn, take it from here. There's no system for the data to travel in parallel. There's no system to bring these people together to execute a trade transaction. One of those parties has a role to play. The bank has a role, the insurance company. It's like you're bringing all of these people together. What does that sound like? It's a social network, right? The ultimate technology here to bring everybody together to do trade should look very much, trade is inherently social. You're bringing all these people together to do it. That's an extremely hard problem. You're talking about building software. Like our product, we have a mobile app for truck drivers that dispatches so that we can get the containers picked up at the port when they arrive. Our user research team had a really hard time getting truck drivers to use an app to know, like they don't, things that we're just used to, like, oh, it's obviously a button. You had to like make the button really three-dimensional. And when you ask, like, how would you shut down the app? What would you do? You're like, I'd just throw it away. Like, to calm down. Like, you're dealing with like sort of antiquated, old school industry. The systems were built in the 80s, still running. So how do you connect all of these things together in a modern tech? It's a really, really hard problem. I'm not telling you that Flexport has solved this, but those are the class of problems that need to happen to make trade efficient. Huge amount of waste goes into the current world. And the way that it works today is you have all this intransparency. I mean, there was a reason that it's funny that George Costanza was the import-export Art Vandelay in Seinfeld, because the idea that this George Costanza, man of mystery, that he's like figured out all the import-export, because it is very mysterious. And the freight forwarders have this information asymmetry where they know more than their customer, and will always use that to take advantage of you. And it's a black box, and you don't know how it works. And so you get really bad behavior. And as soon as they have your merchandise, this is why I started Flexport, because as soon as they had my merchandise, I used to import motorcycles from China. And they would change the price, and I couldn't do anything about it because they had my merchandise in their hands. And it pissed me off, so I started a company to put them out of business. But yeah, they're very hard problems. I'm not saying that, I do think there's a real role for technology. It's interesting to hear that you're both investing so much in automation in your factories. One of the other very interesting things I learned was around iPhone. The iPhone's still made by hand. And why is that? Why would you make it by hand? Can anyone guess?
Because you have to change it. I mean, every 6 months your inventory is obsolete because the new iPhone came out, and so you have to customize it. That's
exactly right. They're very agile. It's not that there's a new iPhone once a year. They actually update it constantly. Like the iPhone that comes out 6 months after the iPhone is a different phone on the inside. It looks the exact same on the outside. They're constantly tweaking it. That can be done with one conversation from the CEO at Foxconn, and 3 hours later, 300,000 people are doing a new process. Whereas machines would take months to retool, and if it's only good for 1 year anyways, you can't do it. So it's not just, humans are expensive. It's not that they're doing that for labor savings. So it'll be interesting to see where is the automation displace jobs, and where does the job that need to stay agile and only a human can do that.
Robert, let me take the flip side of this, because you mentioned something about tapping the global workforce for kind of thinking about the turnaround that you're doing. So tell us a little bit more about those challenges. I know we communicated a little bit in an email, but it would be useful to hear.
So I think a lot of the conversation that happens here, and by the way, guys, smile. I mean, everybody looks a little scary from here. You know?
They're all hungover.
I know, it's from the party from yesterday, right? So the conversation here that's happening is mostly about finished goods and how it gets from A to B. I guess I'll talk a little bit more about servicing and working with CROs, contract research organizations globally from a company in Korea. I think one of the trends is to work with. I mean, you just can't think of the global market. I mean, it's one market, so I just consider it as one market, and you have to, like I agree, you have to work with the best people, and sometimes some of the best people not necessarily in Korea. So what I do is because we can't do generics anymore. Or, I mean, at least the generic market is shrinking. We do drug discovery, and you'll be surprised. There's so many smart people in this world that are just good at what they do in science, but they're not very good marketers. They don't go out and they don't promote. Even in Columbia, I went to the Columbia Medical Center, and you just sit down and if you ask them questions, they have amazing science there, and it's not publicly available. You got to go and talk to them. You got to talk to the people there in licensing, and then license that in, and so forth. And sometimes, you talk to the Columbia people, and then say, "Oh, we have the greatest thing in the world," and you really don't know if that's really true, really the greatest thing in the world. So then you have to talk to the scientists across the Atlantic Ocean and talk to the next expert who happens to live in London or in The Hague. And so I had to fly over there. And the reason why you fly over there is you can only get so much on a phone call, and I think a lot of times people try to do Skype and what have you. It's great technology. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I do believe that human touch is still important. I try to make it to their office. Sometimes I have to drive to Edinburgh, and I got caught into sheep, kind of moving across, and was late to my meeting. But you meet them, they appreciate that, and they actually pay more attention to your project. And I've been very cost efficient that way. So for me, I mean, in terms of global trends, I mean, we talk about tariffs and you talk about trade, and these are really about finished products. What I want to talk about more is from the global business trends to make drugs, innovative drug discovery. You can't just do it in one market. You have to work in the global market. You have to work with the smartest brains, which happens to be globally. It could be from South Korea to somewhere in Beijing to all the way to Frankfurt to Stuttgart, what have you. And it's important that way. And if for anybody who's working in the global business and you want to do something different, I ask you by all means to also leverage the Columbia Business School network. I mean, it's amazing. I would go to a certain country which I have never been to, for example, the Netherlands, and you would just call up and you ask, who's the country leader for the CBS Alumni Club? And you just email them, and they say, "Oh, I'm looking for somebody in this research area. Do you happen to know anybody who works in healthcare?" And then one thing leads to another, and you meet some interesting people. So, I guess what I want to mention about my part is global business trends. Yeah, you need to use technology. You need to think about finished products. But in terms of services, you still need to work and hustle and bustle, call people up, meet people up, and encourage people to use the Columbia network to meet some interesting people. Thank you.
So I'll ask one more question, then maybe I'm sure the audience has interesting questions as well. So Sajjad, I want to take it back, kind of more of the big picture, and then we'll turn it over. So one of the trends that was mentioned, Shirley mentioned, this was the One Belt One Road, which for all of maybe it's useful to let me just put up a picture so it's useful to fix idea. I actually think that this is probably one of the most important global trends that's not discussed, at least not discussed a lot here in the United States, and so this is what China is attempting to build, which is the infrastructure for the next century in Asia and Africa, and there's a lot of discussions you could have about this, from the political discussions, there's economic consequences. There's something very interesting. So, for example, in Sri Lanka, China bought a port in Sri Lanka. And because they bought that port in Sri Lanka, the Indians went and bought the airport that's 20 miles away from that port which is not currently being used, and they paid orders of magnitude more than the value that airport is worth, just because they want to be able to control the closest airport to that port. So there's a lot of very interesting political consequences to China's One Belt One Road. Rehan will remember from a large discussion about this in the country of Myanmar, in which they're trying to build an oil pipeline, which gives them access to the Indian Ocean, which means that they don't have to go through the Straits of Malacca. And so, Sajjad, I'd be curious to hear your perspective, because although you live in Canada, presumably you go back to Pakistan,
Yes.
which has been in which this is a very important phenomenon,
Yes.
and there's costs and benefits to these types of infrastructure projects, and I'd be curious to hear your kind of anecdotal or more professional experience about what people are talking about in Pakistan relative to this.
So I think the name One Belt One Road came about later.
Yeah.
Initially, it was called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, and there's been a lot of excitement in Pakistan about this. There's a lot of cynicism about it as well. It's all supposed to be loans, not grants or anything like that, and a lot of people think that this is going to be the next wave for Pakistan, like the East India Company, where the British came and started to rule the country. But anyway, it's done wonders for the country, though. I mean, in terms of the infrastructure and everything that is happening, it's boosted the economy dramatically. You see a lot of Chinese in the city of Karachi and all over. They're building all kinds of roads and infrastructure. On November 13, 2016, the first load from Western China went through Pakistan to the port of Gwadar, that was built by the Chinese. And I think for geopolitical reasons as well, for Pakistan, this is extremely important. Pakistan has always been very reliant on the US, and US has been a friend sometimes and not a friend sometimes. So for them, China has been a very, very good friend for a lot of years, and for China, it's a major advantage, because Western China, to ship oil from the Middle East for Western China, they've got to go a very long distance. If they go through Pakistan, the Gwadar port, and then up the road, they are there in China in a very, very short period of time. And even the exports from Western China to the rest of the world coming through Pakistan makes it very, very so it's a win-win situation for both the countries. And now China it started off as a $46 billion project, and now it's in Pakistan itself, it's $62 billion project. And the rest of the world, obviously, it's a much larger thing. I mean, this One Belt One Road, I think it's been about a year or so that since they've announced it, and I think it's going to be a game changer. Definitely going to be a game changer in terms of if the Western countries or United States sort of starts looking inwards and China is looking outwards. I think China is going to be the dominant force in the 2050 onwards.
So with that, maybe it'd be nice to open up to the floor for some questions. We very much want this to be a conversation, so yeah, come back.
I was just wondering about, obviously we're talking about technology and trade, and our president got elected by probably the bottom of the trunk there in the elephant curve. And it is a reality, and what can be done, because I believe in all the goodness of trade and all that, but there are the people who suffer who eventually are making us suffer now. So what can be done about those losers who, and I don't mean as far as lectures, but the losers of the trend, so that we don't end up with a duck in the house?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very important one too, because people haven't fully benefited. So, this is it's an interesting question, because you can think about this from different perspectives. The almost rhetorical response to this is we need to improve education, but this is also a very tough response, because education, does this mean vocational skills? Does it mean soft skills? If it means vocational skills, at what age can retraining happen? There's a lot of evidence suggesting that things like housing restrictions in coastal cities, which drive up the price of housing, make it very difficult for someone in the middle of the country to actually reallocate towards and move towards the booming areas. And so that could almost be, like, you could almost think about allowing, when Columbia builds this new business school in Manhattanville, it's going to be built in 2 buildings. And why is it being built in 2 buildings? Because there's a height restriction. And so that implicitly drives up the price of land here, and if this is the area where it's booming, then it makes it hard for someone to move. So this is a very complicated question, but I think what has been interesting is there hasn't seemed to have been a discussion about the potential remedies, because I think if you ask anyone who's studied this, like, tariffs are unlikely to change this at all. And so if it's not going to be tariffs, and we're unlikely to change automation, or at least the trends in automation, right?
Part of it is we have to teach people to make money. I think that our education system teaches people how to feel like they're too good for the jobs that make money. Plumbers make like 120 grand a year, but everyone if you graduate from a liberal arts school, you're too good for that job. And in the future, there are going to be lots of jobs, but people have to learn the skills required, right? Data science, you can now learn this stuff online, but I don't think we teach that. I heard there's a Python class at Columbia now, which is amazing, but we don't teach a lot of the actual skills that are going to matter in the new economy. There are 3 universities that I've found so far in the United States that have a major in sales. 3. Florida State, Baylor, and Weber State in Utah. That's my Moneyball hiring strategy, is to go and we don't train people to sell and make money, right? And it's part of every single job, but it's 20% or more of all the jobs are literally sales, and then it's part of every job, and we don't teach that. So there's opportunity created by that too, like where an entrepreneur should start a subscription sales education company where you can sign up online and learn how to sell things.
So if you're 40 and you're working in a plant that is closed because of technology or because of globalization, most of the time people think it's globalization, but whatever, and you're 40 or 45, you have kids, you have a wife, and suddenly you're out of,
Yeah.
I mean,
you vote for Trump.
Totally. You're right. Those are the people that want it.
I mean, it's true that I think what you said is education is a catch-all for all, but I still think education is still the way to go, because, I mean, back to vocational training. I mean, like Germany, I think people start learning how to be a plumber or something like that, and this is the only country I think you have to wait a week from 8 to 5 in order for a plumber to come. So,
and 30% of all the jobs now require a government license in the United States. It takes more hours of training to become a masseuse than to become a pilot.
and then
How do you know?
I have a 747.
But also, I think education also gives the greatest social mobility. I mean, if you look at, okay, here's my plug-in. I chair the UCLA Foundation, so the greatest social mobility is from education. And even like at UCLA, people jump to social economic classes just by getting a college degree. So, I mean, still, I think education takes time, but I think if we put more investment into education, we might see a trend, a change.
Like with food, we tell people we should eat better food and all that, but the reality is people who have to cook the food and all that, are they really going to do it? And the person who's, the guy who just lost his job, I think there needs to be more than that. All that, I think it's good theory, but in practice, you're 40, 50, you lose a job, are you really going to go back and buy yourself in a Kmart and buy yourself books and stuff like that? Start learning. I don't think it's
There are models, like if you think about Denmark, so Denmark spends like 3% of its GDP on worker retraining, which is an enormous sum of money.
Right.
And so that's a costly investment, but it has made them arguably much more prepared for rapid shifts in the type of work. So it's kind of a multifaceted kind of thing. Some people would argue that maybe we just need conditional cash transfers, right? And so then you just, this is just an issue that we can't solve, but we can maybe solve it through transfers, and maybe that's not.
But that's also the negative side
Sure.
of global trade and of the inefficiencies, because we leave it not to the government but to the individual companies to get efficiency.
Yeah.
But if you have freight forwarders and you have truck drivers who will have their own agenda, and you allow 2 or 3 shipping companies to dominate 80% of the freight, and if you have then all these kinds of things trying to work together, we don't even have one CTRM, a trading and risk management system, as a computer system worldwide. We have it for tolling and you call industry. That's tolling, you know, but for basic trade, we have zero systems for efficiency. And that is because we don't allow worldwide anymore governments to play a role in that. We only want to have it done by individual companies. And nobody's interested in that because they want short-term returns and not longer-term.
Can I?
I'd just like to echo that. You know, a good case study. I spent some time in Poland, worked at G Capital for a while, and I remember the country leader at GE at the time in Poland was saying, this is back in, I just graduated, I guess, the mid-90s, Poland was trying to get away from coal, right, and to get into the EU at the time, right? And I remember the government officials saying, we can't just shut off coal. We'll just disrupt a whole generation. We'll have a revolution if we just stop coal. Now, I'm not advocating for to be more socialist, but in Poland, they had the foresight of saying, we need to educate and put money into the next generation so the children of coal miners are not going to go into coal. They're going to become engineers, or they're going to become computer scientists, or they're going to do something else. And Poland was very successful of moving a whole generation out of coal mining because they wanted to bring in natural gas to get into the EU. But that took money, and that took sacrifice. We don't do that as well in the United States. I mean, you know, we don't have that vision to say, okay, you know, the next generation of auto part manufacturers in Detroit, we got to re-educate that and plow money into that so they can become engineers to produce automated robots. You know, and that's
it's just very dangerous to use government policy to protect jobs, because what you're actually doing is making those people weak, and you're actually lying to them. Right. You're telling them that their job is secure, and those people are 40, 45 years old. They've been misled to think that I have this secure job, when in fact, if it's secure because of whether it's protectionism of terrorists from competition from overseas, or protectionism from licensing requirements that you need a job, that's the exact same thing. You're now telling these people they have security when they don't. The only security is to be competitive and keep improving yourself and win it, you know. And
let me get Robert a chance to, and then we'll come to it.
So I want to just comment on what you mentioned, and this might be a solution not for everybody, but again, I work with people across the world, and some of the things that I talk to sometimes is, I mean, in trying to develop drug discovery, you actually need some people to actually come to Korea. Now, I don't think this applies to everybody. I don't have a solution for everybody, but I would like to tell people that, you know, some of your skill sets are not necessarily, perhaps not you know, I hate to say this, but not really worthy at the time where you're located, but it might be worthy somewhere else. I do encourage people, if by the way, I'm almost 50. I look, you know, like I'm 30, but I'm close to 50. So please don't get me wrong by me saying this. But I work with people who are, you know, retiring, and, you know, they say they'll love to come to work in Korea in 2-3 months, and I hire people like that. I mean, I think that just having terrorists and try to have, you know, your job come back in a city that your company already, you know, decided to leave, I think that's unrealistic. I think it's very tough to unroot your family, or it's really tough to leave your family and go abroad for 3-4 months or a year or two. But that's what a lot of other people do in other countries. I don't know why that, you know, here we all have to say, like, we need this job in my hometown, and I'm not going anywhere. I think that's a little unfair. I think truly in the global world and global trends, you need to be flexible. You need to be able to go anywhere, and you need to make some sacrifices. So that's an opinion I have.
You were saying about the coast is so much more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, but labor mobility is a potential way to blunt these forces. So Sajjad, and then I'll promise I'll continue.
No, I think if we look at the German model in terms of the apprenticeship model, it's a model that has worked for so many years and works so well. I mean, the Deutschmark was a very strong currency, and now even the euro is a very strong currency. And Germany has very low unemployment. Its productivity is very high. And it's a lot of that had to do with the apprenticeship model. For our company, we had to do that. We could not find people because we didn't have a lot of competition from Canadian companies. And we found it very difficult for Americans to, like, we could locate Americans from New York to California, but we couldn't get them to come to Canada. I don't know why. We have. I've invested in a company which is called eSight. It's sort of it's glasses that allows legally blind people to see. And the CEO of the company, it's headquartered in Toronto. The CEO commutes from California. Doesn't live in Toronto. I don't know. Americans, I think, are supposed to be the people that can relocate the easiest, but it's only within the United States. They don't want to go outside the country. Yeah?
Well, our government taxes us too wherever we go, unlike other countries.
Let me get a question. Yeah.
I'm wondering, you were saying that no one's talking about solutions, and I think the problem with talking about solutions here, there is no incentive for the left or the right to talk about solutions to global trade, because the right, they're both political, right? So Trump is political because he's talking to this base, that little edge of the trunk. Then on the left, the unions are political because they want to keep the manufacturing the same way it was before. And I think, I'm wondering if the education that is really missing in the country is understanding global trade and what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Like, most people in this country don't understand what trade means. And so it's easy for the politicians to make it sound bad when it's not bad. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so this is great. So I mentioned at the beginning of this panel that the Chazen Institute is responsible for running these global immersion experiences. And for the first time in the 15 years that we've been doing this, we ran a trip to Ohio. Okay. Now, and Glenn was, to the credit of Glenn, he was an amazing supporter of this trip. I didn't lead the trip; it was two other faculty members who did it. But this was kind of the motivation was to try to bridge this conversation gaps that we seem to have between people maybe in New York and people in Ohio, and what is it like for like your plant managers, for instance, who are sitting in Ohio, to what do they think about global trends? What do they think about the disruption in their local labor markets? And so, that's this one small thing in which we're trying to do that here at Columbia. But I think more of these kinds of ways to kind of bring these two different views together, and there are potential common grounds that we can find, I think would be very helpful. Yeah.
Two questions. First is about e-commerce. I was involved in cross-border e-commerce. I noticed a number. Cross-border e-commerce is about 4% of the total global trade, but it's 20% of the total e-commerce. So why is 5 times difference? So this is the first question. You understand my data, right? Because you got total e-commerce domestic or cross-border. The cross-border e-commerce is 20% of total e-commerce. But global trade, I think, is about 15 trillion or something. The cross-border e-commerce is 600 billion, so I divide it, it's 4%. So I find hard to reconcile that. The second question is about technology. What do anyone of you might think blockchain technology might do to the global trade?
So I'll take the first one, you guys take the second. So the first one is pretty straightforward, because at least if you think about U.S. imports, the bulk of what we import are really high-end machinery goods. So 2/3 of world trade is in intermediate, right? And oil that's excluding oil. And so as soon as you take that into account, then that's e-commerce, which if you think about it, is kind of business to end user, is going to be maybe a bulk of e-commerce, but then a small fraction of total trade. But blockchain, I don't know. Ryan, maybe you have some.
I can't tell whether I love cryptocurrency because of how much money I made in it, or if it's actually good. I think cryptocurrency is very interesting, but it seems like something that you want to. The natural use case here is anytime you. One of the challenges in trade is anytime you sell something, you have a change of title that takes place. By definition, right? And today, that title is actually a physical piece of paper that's flown across in parallel. There's an airplane that carries the piece of paper to give to the new owner of the good. That's literally how it works. It's crazy. So it would be on the surface attractive to say, what if we use blockchain to automatically release the cargo through cryptography? The problem becomes what you've done is move the trust. So today, the trust is with the forwarder to handle that document title transfer and make sure only the person who's allowed to pick up the container does. So in a cryptocurrency world, the idea of cryptocurrency is that it's a trustless system, that we don't need to trust any individual. But who are you trusting now? You have to trust the guy who loaded the goods, that the goods in the container are what was promised. And as long as you're going to trust anybody, I don't see the point of the blockchain. The whole point of it is to be a trustless system, for one. And the other thing that's nice is with cryptocurrency is that it's very good for illicit black market transactions because it's private, because you can't tell who's behind these accounts. Well, that won't work for global trade. By law, you must know who your counterparty is, and trade is so that's one on the compliance side, and two on the trust side. Trade is inherently a repeat game. If you made money selling it, you will do that again, and therefore you're building long-term relationships and trust. So this trustless system. There are 3 or 4 blockchain startups for logistics to addressing that problem, and none of them are going to work because they're not even open source. So now I'm trusting the developer. So yeah, I'm skeptical, but I'm long cryptocurrency in general.
So keeping an eye towards time, I know I want to make sure I end on time, and I want to thank. Maybe we can do this. The panels will be here. Maybe we can continue the conversation afterwards. But I want to thank everyone for being on the panel.
That's cool.